So we're live. Here we are. Welcome back to Potentialisation. I'm Jon Twigg, founder of Potentialisation, and with us today, Dr. Darren Stevens again. We spoke earlier. We're going to explore your work. What I really want to talk about is why I created Potentialisation, because we face challenges in the world. The world's getting more and more complex. One of the things I discovered some years ago was something called spiral dynamics, which is a stage development model. A very simple version of a stage development model is Maslow's hierarchy of needs that a lot more people will have heard of. So I was really excited to attend, was it a virtual talk of yours some years ago? And to hear that you were talking about, you don't call them stages in quite the same way, but that some of the ideas there, I actually asked somebody else afterwards and they said, oh, I didn't really understand what he was talking about. This stuff is challenging. And I know you've done a lot more since. I had a very quick look at your PhD, some of it a little while ago. So what I really want to do is catch up with perhaps an overview of what your work is, and then we can perhaps look at some of the challenges that society faces and maybe how what you're doing might help. Shall we start with a summary? Do you want to let us know what you do?
So my name is Darren, as you can see, and what I do is I created a new theory in adult development. So I was always interested in how we think. And what's the difference between somebody who gets something and somebody who doesn't get something? Because I normally used to just get stuff. And when somebody said they didn't get it, what was stopping them from getting it? So I looked at adult development from people like Robert Keegan, Otto Lasky, Kurt Greuter, Lervinger, all the big names. But because I was already involved with something called the Identity Compass that looks at 50 shortcuts in our thinking, like you've probably heard of some of them, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, but not just those. There's 47 more in internal, external, towards, away from. And I noticed that I could map the levels of development from, say, Keegan using those cognitive intentions. So that was the basis for the theory, right? So based on that, I got my PhD. I called it constructed development theory. And where we are today, that was 4 or 5 years ago, where we are today is I've got the Institute for Adult Development. So my research has been translated into about 7, 8 languages. The website is also in about 6 languages. I've got people all around the world using the framework. And on the website, you'll see there's about 7 people using it to do their own research, which is fantastic. Now, from a potentialization perspective, what's fantastic about that is I'm not interested in the money. I don't make any money from any of that. What I'm interested in is furthering the knowledge, getting everybody to a more self-aware perspective. That is far more useful than me making lots of money. And that's where it maps nicely with the potentialization. With that in mind, I'm going to have to pause there. We have to edit this bit out.
Is there something happening in the background, or?
No, I've lost my train of thought.
All right. So, but what I'll do is, rather than letting you try and do monologue all the way through, I'll just interrupt a bit as well. Ask some questions.
Fine by me. That's fine by me.
So at this point, what I'll say is, you talked about the levels and the mapping. Could you give us, I don't know if it quite works like this, but did you say there are 47 different elements that you're looking
50.
at?
Yeah, 50 shortcuts we use.
50 shortcuts. Is it that you might be able to map one particular one to something that enables, is it sets of them that might let you get to another level? Would there be some good examples of some of the key skills you might need to get to higher levels of thinking?
Yeah. So the real difference is, for example, in Keegan's system and Lasky's system, level 2, 3, 4, and then 5, right? Level 2 is about self. Level 3 is about other. Level 4 is back to self. However, from a more aware position, a more self-authored position, he calls it. So what I noticed.
Can I just ask them, when you say that first level is about self, are we saying that somebody that's thinking at that level is only thinking about self? They haven't got much awareness of other people and the relationships with them. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, correct. And what I noticed was that from a cognitive intention perspective, you have internal, external. Somebody who is very internal level 2, self. Somebody who's very external, level 3, all about the other person. But somebody who is capable of choosing between the two in the moment, they're a much more self-aware thinker. And they can say, well, actually, today I'm going to be internal, or right now I'm going to be external. And that's the difference I noticed. So what I did was I determined that we can deconstruct all of these different levels using cognitive intentions and our level of awareness. Now, you mentioned spiral dynamics earlier. I have also deconstructed the levels of spiral dynamics, and I can map the growth from green to orange to yellow, right? Using constructive development theory, using my cognitive intentions. And what that means is that we don't see in other systems is that if we know somebody who's very internal, then what we do is we get them to focus on external for a little while, depending on their age. And then when they get to the point where they've done that quite a lot, they get to a natural balance and can choose. When you can choose how you respond in the moment, your thinking has gone up a level. You've gone up.
So can I ask more questions? What I think Maslow, in his simple terms, said when one level is satisfied, you've got space or something like that. I can't remember the words or how he phrases it, to look at or to explore higher levels. When I look at spiral dynamics, what it says is that you might have a stable level, and when there's stress in the system, that it's the set of behaviors and the way you think about the world stops working very well, you get pressure to change, which might push you up. So change doesn't necessarily happen on its own. But the key thing here, I would say, is that I get the impression, but I'm not an absolute expert in all this kind of stuff, that this is actually happening quite unconsciously within society most of the time. And we're actually focused on maybe short-term needs, all sorts of different things. And this stuff is kind of politicians, and this kind of stuff is happening under the surface. So that when we're educated, when we go to school and all these other things, this tends to happen in the background without people even thinking about it. That we're not actually consciously being taught how to move up through the levels. And what I'm really curious about is that if we understand, like your model is, all these different potential cognitive shortcuts, could we actually consciously design our education system and coaching and all the other things to deliberately help people to get more complex?
Deliberately, that's an interesting one, because what emerges out of my theory is thinking deliberately, coaching deliberately, leading deliberately, and there are 3 of the 5 books in the deliberately series that's coming out now. The reason, let's go with coaching because it's an easy one to understand, or leading. But from a coaching perspective, we use that. Let's say we use the internal, external. We use those 50 cognitive intentions as a starting point, as the building block for the actual coaching journey. It's a completely different starting point, therefore a completely different journey. I call it next level coaching, and it's part of the Institute for Adult Development. But what I'm not interested in is what the client thinks their problem is, because the problem is never the problem. The problem is how they construct the problem. I know Captain Jack Sparrow said that, right? The idea is that we do a profile called the Identity Compass. We tease out their 50 cognitive intentions, and we point out the ones that are causing the most consternation in their construction of self. And by virtue of that, they cannot not grow from that, because you've pointed out where their limitations are in their thinking, where the imbalance is. We strive for balance after that. Okay. Same principles with leading. I've got videos on YouTube, so by all means go and look at the Institute and you'll see the videos as well. Leading, we teach about 7, 8, 9 different types of lead: laissez-faire, developmental, coaching lead, all these kind of different ideas on leading. But what they never tell you, and I teach at university and teach this, what they never tell you, but I will in my lectures, is that some people are not capable of doing developmental leadership. Why? Because they're not cognitively complex enough. So I've got a grid on one of the videos that points out all the different levels of all the different types of leadership, and whether my levels, AQ5 to AQ10, can do it, can choose to do it, and more importantly, can choose not to do it.
Can I interrupt? Because the way you said that, some people might get upset. Some people are not capable of doing that. So what I want to just clarify is that I would think that most of the time, what that means is they simply not had the training, the education, the learning or teaching of those skills that are needed to do it. I suppose in some cases there's going to be people that won't necessarily imagine somebody that's autistic might be really good in some skills and not have other skills and might never be able to have them because of what's happening in their brain or whatever else. But
I appreciate that, but to be honest with you, I've never tested my theory from a neurodivergent perspective, so I can't talk intelligently about that. I would, in all honesty, I'd have to avoid it. From what you're talking about, though, there's people like Professor Hannah Critchlow and Robert Plomin who've done work on the DNA of intelligence and things like that, and it's controversial, but it's irrefutable in the sense that the data is there, because there are biological limits, and if you think about I'm 5'7". I will never be 6 foot tall like Henry Cavill, Superman. I will never be 6'1" and built like Henry Cavill. It's a physical limitation. In much the same way as we go to the gym to build our brains up, our bodies up, we also have those physical limitations in our brain because they're now starting to look at the biological predispositions that have been given to us from our mum and dad's genes that basically shape our bodies and our brains.
But what I was trying to do is I was introducing that and saying, yeah, that's controversial, mainly to get away from it. That's not what you were saying. You were simply saying that people hadn't learned the skills.
Well, it's not a skill. And I teach this too at uni. It's not a skill, it's a capacity and a capability. So do we think thinking is a skill? Well, we know it's not a skill because you can't do it on your own. And I've got a model that shows this. You always need somebody who's more complex to point out the patterns that you can't see in your thinking. And I call them a more complex other. Vygotsky would have called them a more knowledgeable other when you were looking at children and teachers, because a teacher has a coping mechanism for the child to grow their thinking to the zone of proximal development, so the next zone up. Well, what I called that was the zone of dynamic development, because you and I, John, we're adults. We don't need a more knowledgeable other necessarily. What we need is somebody who's a little bit more complex in their thinking to point out what I can't see. Now, it's neither good nor bad in that sense. But if you think about it, because somebody asked me this on LinkedIn the other day, if you think about it in terms of choice, response, how aware you are, there aren't many situations where more choice is worse than less choice. Right?
I'm just thinking that's really reminded me of something in a way that I'd never thought about before, and perhaps gives me a better understanding of it or an explanation. Now, I'm going to use a term that you won't like because you'll totally disagree with the possibility of what it might be. But the reason I want to say it is that we get people that are interested in alternative, spiritual, all sorts of things, talk about a thing called morphic resonance, which is that what they're saying is that when one person in the world discovers something, it's more likely to be discovered by other people in the world.
Correct.
But what I'm just realizing is that is it actually that our societies pass information around and the general body of knowledge is increasing to the level at which it's much more easy to notice specific patterns and new ideas because the framework's already been lifted up. We've actually built a world and an environment where those experts and those other skills are available in the same way as you're saying that without coaches and people with the relevant levels of skills to help you move up, it won't happen. If we go back 1,000 years, we didn't have the necessary skills and science to move up those levels. We've had to build up and then stand on other people's shoulders, as it were.
Yeah, but if you want me to give you an analogy of that, it's exactly the same. In the 1970s, blue tits in Scotland and blue tits in England, 400 miles apart, both figured out simultaneously that if they pecked the silver top on a milk bottle, they'd get the cream. They'd never met, but they'd been exposed to the environment simultaneously and figured it out at the same time over time. But the spiritual angle of that, two of the people that are using constructive development theory in their research, one's called Jude in Australia, and he's using it to create a spiritual awareness scale, I guess. And I'm not so arrogant as to assume that constructive development theory is finished. there are a couple of people who are using it who I think will make my theory better and take it further. Yeah.
I mean, to get much more down to earth, people say Apple were amazing and brilliant, and they invented an iPhone. But if you start digging into it, the technologies that they used at that point, in terms of miniaturization of systems, stronger glass, all sorts of things, were not available just a few years before that. So it was impossible to invent a phone that worked in that respect. So the circumstances, the life circumstances, the science, the engineering, and all the other things is we're gradually building up more and more complexity in society. And of course, we need thinking to match.
We do. And one of the things I kind of have an issue with is people always bring up Maslow and his framework. Now, at my scales, AQ5 is here, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. AQ10 is completely made up. And from a self-actualization perspective, right? Self-actualization is a journey, it's not a destination. But more importantly, Maslow picked people that he thought were self-actualized and wrote about them. He never actually talked to them. He made it all up. My one's born of data, so at least I've got 9,000 profiles supporting my positions. I've never met an AQ9 person, never mind an AQ10 person.
So you say Maslow, he picked up writing about people from, and then said, look, it looks as if that person over there, who I've never met personally.
Yeah, and he picked famous people like Babe Ruth and people like that, of his time.
One of the dangers with that, of course, is that they're idealistic accounts of their lives. If you'd been there and seen how they were at home with the kids when under stress and everything,
they could have been completely low level. Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. So
the other thing is, I don't like the word actualized. It seems to imply that there's some human perfect condition, and some people have got there.
Oh, not me.
Oh, okay. But you're getting close, I know. But of course, that seems crazy. I mean, it's a developing model. Our brains are getting more complex. Science is getting more complex. It just seems crazy to me that there can be an end point. It's got to be an unfolding of exploration of ourselves, the universe, everything else.
Imagine what am I, 52? When I was in school and what I was learning and what my 16-year-old son is learning now. We are worlds apart, absolutely worlds apart. Not only has he got to learn what I knew, he's also got to learn the new stuff since the 80s.
Now, this is one of the things I'm really fascinated about. And this is where I'm perhaps unusual. There aren't many people that think in the ways I do, that most people find it easier to specialize. And that's why we get experts in particular fields. But what I think is missing is people that can step back and bridge things. They might not know the very detailed aspects of a lodge. And it's an inherent need in society to have specialists and experts in particular subjects to push to the limits. But they tend to invent their own languages, whether it be physicists, chemists, engineers, and the crossovers between them are not as good as perhaps they've probably got things in one speciality that will be extremely useful in other ones if only people talked more.
So what you got and me is an options pattern.
Okay.
Right? Using my framework. And what we do well is we join the dots. So now, think about this, right? Whether you are a first year undergrad or a master's student or a PhD, how well you join the dots for your reader will determine what grade you get. So definitely for undergrad and masters. The more if you've got 2,000 words and I join 50 dots, but you join 200 dots, you're going to get a higher grade than me because you're evidencing and supporting what you're writing about using referencing, for example, right? That is your complexity. That is you and me joining dots to do it. And what I do when I'm lecturing is I will make my information available to the students using today's activities, what's going on in the world, mapping it back to their own country, because a lot of my students are from all over the place, and I will talk about culture. I will talk about the culture of the room. I will talk about the fact that there are 34 tribes in Nigeria, and we've got a table full of Nigerians, you and me, John, we might just see a table full of Nigerians, but the Nigerians see 4 tribes. So I start to bring all that in, but that's me joining dots that they didn't know I knew. And it helps them to understand the information, exactly what you're talking about. So I think we've got an options pattern and we're really good at joining the dots. But in order to do that, you have to be capable of seeing the dots.
Seeing the patterns.
Seeing the dots, seeing the patterns, seeing the connections. And that's the bit that's missing. We talk about VUCA, don't we? Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And we talk about that kind of world. But people like you and me, what we do is we take the uncertainty and we take the ambiguity and we see where they map to each other. And that's, for me, is where the complexity comes in.
Now, one of the things that's happening in the world at the moment, part of the spiral dynamics, even at a basic level, is that when there's stress in the system, people in the system, they've learned a particular culture, how to behave, how it works. But under stress, as the environment changes, they adjust. So, and there's obviously the bell curve. Some adjust faster than others. Some don't want to change. Some will sit at the back with their arms crossed and never change. Even going to university, a few of them can't wait to get there. Most average people feel a bit uncomfortable, but adjust. But there'll be a few that say, I don't like this, I'm going home, back to the family. AI is coming, technology is coming. AI is going to change things faster than ever before. We've got all sorts of S-curves of adoption of energy change, renewable energy, manufactured food. The world is changing in a way faster than ever before. But what suddenly struck me as you were talking there was about the complexity is that spotting, not quite sure it's the right word to spot, but these large language,
it's awareness.
Yeah, well, that's the why I'm hesitating as I'm saying it. That these large language models are pulling in and spotting, quote spotting, because there's no consciousness, there's no awareness, but they're finding patterns in that data, and they're doing it in neutral ways. As they don't need to specialize like a human would, because they've got this huge capacity to pull so much information in. And the AI is already spotting patterns that humans just wouldn't be able to, because they can't pull all the information in, but they're doing it without awareness. So of course, what we've got to be what we've got to do is be really careful that we don't hand over our conscious decision making, or wisdom, we might call it, and you might be able to map that into cognitive shortcuts or however.
Yeah.
Or, I mean, I know you can. You might be able to tell us a bit about it, but the computers can't. So there's a very real danger that we don't just say that, oh, look, these AIs are really clever, we should let them make the decisions, because they've got this brilliant pattern matching, but they've got no consciousness, no empathy, no humanness.
That's the plot to the Age of Ultron, the Avengers movie, where they yeah, exactly. They programmed the AI to say, can you fix a planet? And he said, yes, the worst thing for the planet is humans. I'm going to get rid of all the humans. But the other thing you're thinking about as well is there's something called the Bible code. And what they did was they went through the Bible and picked every 8th letter or something like this, right? Every 10th letter, every 20th letter, and then figured out what words were created out of this. Now, it's called the Bible code. There's a book, there's 2 books on it, but you could do exactly the same thing with War and Peace, right? Any decent sized book has this. And what they're saying, what essentially they're doing is making up nonsense based on a pattern. And it doesn't mean anything. That's the issue, where we're finding patterns that don't really mean a lot. You know, it's a false finding. What's the result? A false positive. You know,
what they talk about with AI is how they hallucinate. I listened to something which was really interesting, and they were talking about hallucination, and they were saying people are starting to say that the large language models hallucinate things some of the time. This guy said, no, they don't. They hallucinate all the time.
Yeah.
All they're doing is looking at the statistics of which word is most likely to come next.
Yes.
One of the fascinating and really important things they also said is that if you take a large language model and just let it do its thing without any kind of framework, if you give it a prompt, it'll produce a result. If you give it the same prompt again, it'll give you exactly the same result over and over again. So what they do is they introduce an element of randomness. So if there's top 10 statistical most likely words, not always pick the first one, sometimes pick the second one, and occasionally pick the third one. And of course, if you pick the third one sometimes, and then on the next word, sometimes it's the third one, you've now got 10 possibilities, 9, 3 by 3 by as you carry on. So you seem to get all this variety as if it's thinking and coming up with different ideas. But all they've done is introduce a randomness to which of the possibilities they're picking up.
So that's
And
not complexity.
but it makes it look and feel to some extent human, but it isn't. It's just reproducing our knowledge in a way that looks interesting.
I know. I tested ChatGPT-4 Copilot with Microsoft and said, "Can you please summarize constructive development theory by Stevens?" And it did a really good job. And then obviously someone told me all it did was go traipsing through the internet to find out your stuff.
So, and of course, if you ask it about something historical and there are no records, then it will literally make it up because there isn't good data. And actually, that's one of the things that I'm really, really interested in is if it's bringing information out of the internet, if it's a really broad subject, it's got lots to pick from and it's probably going to be reasonably right. If it's something that's more obscure and there's only one person written about it, all it can do is present that.
Yep.
But why was that person writing that? Were they interested in business development and making lots of money? Were they interested in saving the planet?
Yeah.
So
and what human
biases? Sorry.
Yeah. And what level is it written at?
What complexity? Absolutely. So are we picking up advice that actually would be bad for the planet? Or so how do we understand what's coming back at us and what human knowledge drove that?
Well, you know, a few years ago, they whoever they are, I think it was Google, sent out bots to the internet, and it came back quite definitively that the internet was racist and sexist, you know, homophobic, all these things, basically because humans are.
Yes.
That's it. It's just a reflection of ourselves. That's the other thing we've got to be careful of, is that oh my God, AI is going to kill us. It's going to destroy us because it's evil. Actually, it's just a mirror to what we do and think.
When somebody said to me a little while ago, a few years ago, everybody's racist. I think people are training this all over the place, and it's like I instantly said, no, they're not. It's like a baby's not racist. We learn cultural values.
Correct.
So it's part of the way that we're culturally brought up, but it's also really fundamentally part of how we survive. We have to believe in ourselves, in our Freudian me. We have to believe in our family, and it's this just natural protect our group.
There's loads of research on this one. There's loads of research on this, and if you show a 3-month or a 6-month-old baby, if you've got a white baby and you show it a black face, it will cry. Conversely, if you've got a black baby and you show it a white face, it will cry. It's evolutionarily advantageous for a baby to recognize faces that are not like what it normally sees. So if
that's really interesting because it's what they normally see. So if you took, I'm not advocating that we start kidnapping babies, but if you took a black or a white baby out of their context and adopted it into a different culture, a white baby in a black environment won't even know that it's white for some time. It will just see black faces and vice versa.
Yeah, there's loads of research on this, and we are evolutionarily predisposed to looking for difference. Some people will call it racism, but how can a baby be racist when it doesn't know what race is?
You know? So we first of all need to have the capacity to start to understand what we're looking at and seeing and experiencing in life. But the key aspect there must be to recognize why we respond in certain ways so that we can have the choice to respond in better ways. And that's a key part of what you do.
Intention, awareness, choice, and response. Exactly that. What's your intention? Are you aware of it? Does that awareness create any choices? And that choice, can you choose how you respond in the moment based on that choice? So yeah, absolutely.
Another little story. I ran a group somewhere 20 years ago, more. We had different speakers once a month or so. And one guy came and he was doing piecework, negotiating all sorts of different things. And he spent 2 weeks in Northern Ireland, 1 week with a Catholic family. And these are people that are at the core of the problem, shall we say, very much involved. 1 week with a Catholic and 1 week with a Protestant family. And he said he knew he was going into an environment where the fathers would go out at night with the guns, do whatever they do. But the bit that really shocked him was how the mothers taught the toddlers from a very early age to hate the other side because they killed your uncle.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the opposite of choice. They're just repeating the pattern. Now, for very understandable human emotional reasons, but to me, that could be a key element of how humanity gets better by more people learning to question, why have I been taught to feel like this and to respond in certain ways? Could I be better?
Yeah, I mean, there's a monkey and a banana experiment on this where researchers put a 5 or 6 monkeys in a cage, and they put a banana hanging from the top of the cage and a step ladder that goes up to the bananas. And as soon as a monkey goes up the step ladder to get the bananas, they get jet watered. So okay, but all of them get jet washed by the researchers. After a while, the monkeys learn that anybody going up the ladder causes the jet wash, right? So what they then do is they introduce new monkeys. The new monkey goes on the ladder. The other monkeys beat that monkey up because they know that it's going to cause the researchers to jet wash them. The other monkeys go, what the bloody hell have I done? Right? And over time, all of the monkeys that were originally jet washed are replaced by monkeys that have never been jet washed, but they all beat each other up as soon as they try and get up the ladder. It's conditioned behavior, and we are so susceptible to it. We're not as clever as we think we are.
Now that takes me to something I've been thinking out for a long time, is that if you do any marketing, they teach you about A/B split testing. If we go back years, you'd put 2 different adverts in a magazine, maybe different weeks, see what the response is. The response is better to that one. It's like, obviously that advert worked a bit better than the other one. So we're fine tuning how we present or market our product. But of course, it's what we do individually. It's like, well, what do we say? How do people respond? We're all fine tuning things. Now, if that was in a magazine years ago, before we had the internet, that would have taken a couple of months to do that experiment and get the results. The internet makes it much faster. So on your website, you could change it one day and make it a different color the second day.
Well, people make a living out of this, don't they?
Absolutely. Or people are fine tuning it, teaching you how to do Facebook adverts. But what's happening inside Facebook and some of these others is they're using AI now to do thousands of tests a second on millions of people to make the whole experience as emotionally engaging as possible so that they sell more adverts, so you stay on the system longer. There's a very real danger that we're actually abusing ourselves as humanity for profit accidentally. It's like people used to say when I was young, well, they're watching too much TV. Now they're saying they're on the phones too much. What are they going to say in 20 years' time when we're part of this AI?
Yeah, they're too connected to the system.
So we can lose ourselves in it if we're not careful. Because we're
will.
not having the choice to step back and think.
I mean, I've got an iPhone 13, I think it is, and I actually contemplated getting a brick phone. You know, the old-fashioned phones.
Yeah.
I actually thought about getting one of those and going back, and then you realize just how much is tied up to your phone, your payment systems, your banking, all kinds of weird and wonderful things are all embedded within the phone. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do kind of a halfway thing where I'm going to keep a couple of things on this phone and just have another phone for communication. I haven't figured it out properly yet, but I do think I want to dumb down a bit with my technology in that sense.
It's really fascinating where it's going, because this stuff obviously enables us to do so many things so effectively. Starlink, the satellites, they're actually building emulators for the phone towers into them, so that you'll actually be able to send text and make calls anywhere on the earth, even without local receivers.
That's cool.
There will, and obviously incredible benefits for people. You break a leg up a mountain where there's no signal, you'll still be able to save the text.
I know, because I've walked across the Andes and no signal for at least 8 or 9 days, I think.
Wow.
No signal at all. Well, we weren't 5,000 meters the whole time because that's just beyond my capacity, but we were 4,000 meters up, between 4 and 5. And of course, there's no pylon up there,
Absolutely. So we're getting a more and more connected world. AI is getting more and more involved. We're going to start having those Neuralink chips in our brains, and they're going to do incredible things. They're going to help people. The first demonstration was recently that Neuralink did. The guy, quadriplegic,
Yep.
but he's playing chess and computer games just by thinking about it now.
It is amazing.
But are we going to get junkies? So we start feeding ourselves constantly. Is it going to be worse than the phones? It's also possible that at the moment, computers, the phones, we have to look down at them. They kind of take us out of the world. It's possible that we'll still be in the world with extra into our brains.
Augmentation.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they've got a rudimentary version of it where you can, on your phones, where you can map 3D images from your phone onto the environment, but it's really on your phone. So
yes.
until they start making it 3D and external.
So let's get back. We've got problems in the world at the moment. We've got one of these. I'm not going to try and use it as a definitive thing, but we have cultural differences and environments. We've got Israel and Gaza and various different culture things going on. We know that if everybody involved could say, not forgive, but step back and choose not to engage in that, not just the war right now, but the whole ongoing situation, everybody would be better off. But they're bound to it emotionally, not just through it's generations of training and suffering, that it's incredibly difficult to see how you break that cycle, because your coaching is not going to pick up in Gaza at the moment. The situation is not accessible, but obviously you want to take it into more of the world.
You've got to grow their thinking. The trouble is where everybody's tribal.
Yes.
And tribal, whether you're looking at it from a Keegan or Stevens or, spiral dynamics perspective, it's not the highest level thinking. And if you do it to me, I'm going to do it to you. Well, that's eye for an eye. That makes the whole world blind, as Gandhi said. So we need to develop their thinking to the point where they're not thinking about immediate retaliation. They're thinking about 15 years, 20 years down the line and what it's going to be like for everybody in the future.
A key question for you then, which might be to do with the different cognitive shortcuts. Israel is incredibly technical. They've got chip security companies, all sorts of high tech, but they're still being very tribal because they're under pressure all the time and the whole situation. There's obviously different cognitive shortcuts there. They're very good at some technical, intellectual capacities, but they're still embedded in this emotional war.
Yeah, I mean, from a cognitive shortcut perspective, they're basically focusing on belonging to the group, aren't they? This is my group, and I'm under attack from another group. So you've got your internal, external. In psychology terms, it's literally called in groups and out groups. How do you show someone that the benefit of collaborative thinking outweighs immediate gratification? That's the problem. How do we make sure that in 10 years' time we don't have these problems because we've thought around and above the issue? But Israel's a difficult one, though, because Hamas has in their constitution the destruction of Israel, so it's going to be very difficult. And the way Hamas works is that they blend into their people. You don't know who's Hamas and who's not. It's not like they wear a uniform.
But of course, with Iran, if you go back before the revolution, it was quite a technical and free society. And even despite lots of suppression, many of them would not want their country to be doing what they're doing. So even within those environments, it doesn't take many people in power to abuse the whole of that culture.
So when you look at leadership, again, let's go back to that one. So at level 2, level 3, and level 4, for example, at level 2, you've got your despots, you've got your Ayatollah Khomeinis and all this kind of stuff where it's do what I say, it's my rules, my way or the highway. At level 3, you've got a much more socialized environment. So how are we doing? What's our relationship like? Are we okay with each other? Do you need a hug? Are we okay? And then at level 4, what you've got is somebody, oh, by the way, level 2, they want to make money. What's in it for me now? How much money can I make for me now? At level 4, you've still got the sense of self, but what they're saying is it's a more social enterprise that they create. They're not necessarily worried about making tons of profit. They're making sure that everybody is taken care of. And it's that kind of understanding, more socialized, not socialized as in level 3, but a social environment that we need to create in places like Israel that say, well, I'm not responsible for your feelings. You're not responsible for my feelings. But how do we work this out together so that we're all benefiting from the outcome? And collaboration being a high level principle is very difficult to convince people of doing because of this tribal nature that, yeah, but they did this. Yeah, but you did that. And it's that, yeah, but that's the problem.
We're incredibly lucky here in the UK as one of the most, perhaps in quotes, civilized countries. Obviously, it's not perfect. There's other things going on. And we're lucky, I think, in many respects, because we've had hundreds of years of learning to live within structured world where people go to work, pay the bills, do the right thing, drive on the right side of the road, the left side, and all those kind of things. There are still some people where the education system has failed them, or for whatever reason they've had traumatic backgrounds, or they find themselves in situations where they turn to crime and do things outside of the rules. But because the whole of our society is relatively stable, we can have a relatively small police force that can try to enforce that for the people that don't want to follow the rules, to keep it working for everybody else. We haven't got that at an international level. The United Nations is not a police force. It can't enforce those things.
Almost
Perhaps
pointless.
one day, in hundreds of years or many years, we might move to a situation where the world is more like that. But we're a very long way from that at the moment, with different cultures, because we've got culture wars across the world, different
You know what
ways
it's going to
of
take, don't you? You know what it's going to take. We can't go into Africa or the Middle East and tell them how to run their countries. Okay, for all the things you've just been talking about, the colonial history and all this other stuff, right? We can't do that anymore. What it's going to take to sort this out, for example, you've got Yemen, you've got Sudan, all these other places. Why do we wait until the country has got 26 million people on the verge of collapse before we do something? Why can't we go in and say, actually, you're ruining your country. Let's take it over. We'll sort it out. We'll install a government that's going to work it out and figure it out properly as a globe, not as just one country, as a global representative. And that, because we can't do it because of the tribal nature of what we've been talking about. What it's going to take, and this is ridiculous, by the way, is aliens coming down saying, hang on, you lot are rubbish. We're going to sort this out for you. And the reason that would work is because it's then humans as one tribe, aliens as another, and that's the only thing that's going to unite our thinking.
A common enemy is one way of looking at it, yes.
Yeah, even if they come and try and sort us out.
Like when you go on holiday and you meet somebody from the other end of the country, and it's like, here you might be very tribal. You support a different football team to me.
Yep.
But when you're on holiday in Spain or wherever you go, it's like, oh, you're British. We're together. So it's the context of where we're at.
It is exactly that.
So it's the in-group. What is the in-group? How do we define it, and in what context?
And Lasky talks about, Otto Lasky talks about upwardly and downwardly divided teams. And what he means by that is, if you've got 1 million people and 900,000 of them are low-level thinkers and 100,000 of them are high-level thinkers, that's going to give you different problems than if you had 900,000 high-level thinkers and 100,000 low-level thinkers. So, and you got to look at how countries think as a unit. And are we capable as a country of transcending the thinking barriers the complexity, the cognitive meaning making, the sense making, to think around the problems that would ultimately unite us as a people. And we're just not that far advanced in our thinking yet.
So we obviously, your work is not going to go into Israel and Gaza and solve those problems tomorrow, but you are trying to take it to more people. You're getting more people doing it. Do you want to tell us where it's up to? You've got different people beginning to do it.
Yeah, so I've got about, did I say this earlier? I've got about 7 people doing their PhDs or masters. One guy did his masters with my research. So they're going to start to take it further because they're looking at things that I never looked at. Like one guy called Ivo in Switzerland, he's looking at the idea of CDT in a therapy environment, and he's taken that. We call it the CAIR model, CAIR. Do you remember earlier I said intention, awareness, choice, response? But if you put it in a therapy context, it becomes choice, awareness, intention, response. And that's easier to map to things like, or at least aid in things like the what's it called, ACT and CBT and the other therapies out there. So he's looking at my research in a therapy frame. Jude is looking at it from a leadership and a spiritual frame. Another lady, Verity, hasn't started yet, but she wants to look at it from a special needs neurodivergent perspective, which is why that will definitely change it, because I've never done that. So there are people taking the theory further. There are also people using it in Australia to do it as a foundation for their coaching. South Africa, all across Europe, they're using it for development. It's translated into all those other languages.
So do you have an idea yet how many people have been in a coaching session or something similar where people have been using what you do? And then an associated question would be, if a coach is using what you do, are they transferring the knowledge of how you work and the method at all, or is the coach using it in a self-contained way to work with the?
So that's a good question, because if they're going to do it as a coaching methodology, they've got to use next level coaching, which is through the Institute of Adult Development. And they then agree to use, for example, the identity compass as the base profile. I couldn't think of the word. As a base profile for the person's development, because it's how they construct the problem. If their level of construction is here, they're always going to construct the problem here. They're never going to construct the problem here. What they need is that more complex other to point them out and say, look, this is how you could think about it. This is how you could think about the problem, how you could construct it. And by virtue of that feedback, they grow. Now, what they should be doing is, if they're doing that in places like Australia and that, they should also, it's licensed to them via the Institute. So they should also be paying a license fee for that kind of thing. At the moment, that's not quite working. We're working that out. But there are lots of people going through the training in various places around the world using CDT as the basis for their development. But also, I forgot to tell you this, there's a university in Kuala Lumpur who want me to go over there and deliver a vertical development workshop, let's say master's level, because I've written it at master's level, a vertical development workshop, so that we get these students to develop their thinking in a vertical direction. With that in mind, I'm also doing the same thing here. For my university, I run the apprenticeship program. That's where businesses send their employees and they get a business degree. But in the final year, I've added a module that looks at cognitive complexity and the leadership complexity. Because, as I said earlier, no one ever talks about complexity from a leadership perspective and their capacity to lead. So I've introduced that. So there's always going to be people around looking at and using the theory, thinking about people differently. And I get that kind of feedback all the time. Darren, since you showed us CDT, I now look at people from a developmental perspective, and it's really interesting. So there's loads of people being exposed to it, all around the world, not just from the IAD, but also from my own workshops and my own talks. I don't know how many, but quite a lot.
I remember listening to some business advice talking about the nature of different size companies. You work for yourself if you can't work with anybody, or you might have a few people working for you and you can work as a friends, almost collaborative. But as a company gets bigger, you start to need some structure or management. And it takes a different level of thinking to be a manager of managers.
Yep.
And when you get to corporate levels, to be able to run that at that very high level, you need different levels of thinking again.
Elliot Jacques talks about that kind of thing as well. So yeah, you call it span of discretion.
And what I'm thinking is that how do we get for your methods to be taught to a sufficient level for some of those people to not just say, yeah, that was great, I think like that, but I'm now starting to tell other people and ask them to come to training or introducing it to them, or and perhaps can we even get it into the education system so that more young people are coming through it, etc.
Well, I'm doing that. So what I do is with the students is I teach them how to think, not what to think. Honestly, it doesn't matter what they think. We look at how they think, how they deconstruct their thinking that gets them to a position where they're thinking about it in this way, and then we deconstruct that to in order to reconstruct it differently. I do that all the time. But from a business perspective, I run this thing called the 3 Leaders program. And what I do is I take a bespoke problem for the organization and I map it to make it easy, shall we? I map it to Keegan's stage 2. Then I write the exact same problem at Keegan stage 3, and then the exact same problem at Keegan. Nice video FX at Keegan stage 4.
I don't know where that came from. Must be built into this system.
My camera. It's Apple. So I apologize for that.
You've got fireworks now. I don't know if you noticed.
I know. You can do all kinds of stuff. Look.
Oh, I see. You can actually you put a message and you've got great stuff.
So
is there one for cognitive development, and then suddenly the world will be full of it?
So this is it. So this is why, right? So this is why one of the things I want to do in my apprenticeships students is something called wicked problems and scenarios. Because Shell have been doing this for years. They project forward 50 years, try and figure out what the problems are going to be, and get the directors and the managers to figure out what those issues are in 50 years' time. I want more capable thinkers coming out of university. It doesn't necessarily matter what Dave Ulrich said about excuse me, HR in 1998 or 2008. What the businesses want is someone who is capable of breaking down those thinking barriers. So that's what I'm trying to introduce. So what I do is by offering this bespoke problem at level 2, 3, and 4, on day 1, we go through the level 2 problem. On day 2, we go through the same problem at level 3, and they get the point that there's a different way of thinking about it. And then at level 4, on the 3rd day, we go through it from a level 4 perspective, and I might lose a few of the people in the room, okay? But the fact that they visited level 4 thinking for a day changes how they construct their world.
I think the key thing, well, a key aspect of that, you said how or what to think. I think that it's not been a bad thing because, like all animals, we have to survive. We've developed this capacity for abstract thought, or even abstractions of abstractions that other animals don't have, which has enabled us to construct social conventions and rules and all sorts of things. But we still, as parents and a species, teach our young, our children, what to do to survive. The big shift that's happening right now is the world in 20 years from now. It's accelerating all the time. The world has changed a lot in the last 50 years, but with AI and everything else, what the world will look like in another 20 years will be way beyond what we've got now. So there is no point teaching people what to do because it will be gone. It will be different. The only useful skills will be the how to think, how to be agile, how to adapt. One of the key things I like to try to say is that we shouldn't be teaching children's schools the politics of what's right and wrong, and is it about making money or is it about social support. It should be about thinking about what's appropriate in the moment for that part of society and everything else. We should be teaching children how to count, not what they're going to do with the counting, so that they can use those skills, whatever they might be, to the best of their ability in as free-flowing and agile way as possible for what future that we don't know. Because parents teaching, I want you to be a doctor, right? Those jobs will be gone. It'll all be different.
Of course it will. I mean, surgeons are using robots now to do minute incisions, and then they're still doing it with their eyes, but they're using the robots to do it for them because the robot doesn't shake, and it's precise, so on and so forth. So Of course, everything's changing as we're very quickly. Just at university, for example, do we introduce AI to help the students write better assignments? Do we then use AI to grade the assignments? Because then, what's the point of the student being there and the university? You know, if AI is writing it and AI is grading it, where do we go?
One of the key things for me is if we train the large language models on the sum, we get into the point of this. Well, it's at the moment the large language models are sucking information out of the internet,
Yep.
and maybe a few other places. With real world AI, Tesla are training the cars on real experience. And what that means to turn the car left or right. It's not just tokenized words, it's relating to the world. And we've seen demonstrations of humanoid robots literally in the last few weeks having conversations about the physical world around them. Pass me the apple, pass me something to eat. We're going to get to the point where we're training these AIs on the sum of human knowledge. The danger would be is they can't improve because they're only, or can they? Can they actually start to generate their own new knowledge?
Can they abstract from the abstractions?
And if, even if they can, that's still not awareness and consciousness. It's still, yes, we get into really complex questions. But the question I was going to, because we can't answer that one, is what if we get to the point where humans stop inventing new things? Does the AI stop because it's got no new input?
No, well, you're assuming that the AI won't know. If the AI can look over there and say, "Pass me the apple," what's the intention?
Well, I look at it as a calculator. If I press my buttons on maybe the kids don't know what a calculator is. They have a calculator app, but we used to have these physical things. But it's the same. But you press the buttons on the calculator. There's a little circuit in it, and you press 6 times 7, and it gives you the answer to the universe, 42. But that calculator doesn't know what any of that means.
That's my point about the robot you were just talking about. If the robot can look over there, because I've got a Heineken Zero. I don't drink alcohol during the week. In fact, I'm off alcohol at the moment, so I'm drinking zero alcohol. If the robot could look at that and go, "Pass me the zero alcohol beer, please," the robot has an intention. What's the intention? How is that not sentience?
We're going to get into the hard problem if we're not careful. Well, we're there already.
Well,
what is consciousness? So
exactly. So for me, I mean, everything I've read on the hard problem, the idea of consciousness is that it dies with the brain, and we can test it using coma patients. I have no problem with that. But if a robot can look at an apple and tell you it wants the apple, pass me the apple, is the pass me the apple an algorithmic response to seeing an apple, right? Or does it actually want the apple because it's proving a point?
Well, at the moment, the answer to that is very much the first one, that it's just saying the words, because we know it's a large language model in there that's working out meaning, and it's just giving you statistically what's the next word. It's getting very good at it.
Yeah.
So there isn't a thought process going on. It's just, well, there's a processing process going on.
What do we do when we do that?
Well, there's research that shows that the decision is made in our brain before we're conscious of it. So there's an argument that actually the brain is a computer. The consciousness of it, is it just an illusion? We're getting into all sorts of complex things if we get here, but it's really fascinating. But it gets to the point where it's almost not useful. We've almost got to drag ourselves back to
think about it, right? Because one of the things that we talk about earlier on, we mentioned, let's bring it back to what we were talking about earlier. I talked about joining the dots, and the more capable you are at thinking, the more capable you are of joining the dots on behalf of other people, the more cognitively complex you will be, right? That's not the same as Deep Blue understanding the billions and billions of moves on a chessboard. It doesn't understand them. It just knows what they are algorithmically. But if the AI can project forward and say, I pass me the apple because I want to do something with it, again, that's different.
Well, it is if it actually wants to do something with it, as opposed to saying the words as if it wanted to.
Yeah.
And
And
I
how
think
would you,
we're
yeah,
still in the simple version of that. The question would be: is consciousness simply arise at a level of complexity and just appear? We don't know. But in the meantime, we've got a world with AI is exploding. I've written a Twitter X post just a few hours ago exploring a world where we plug Neuralink in, we test, we eat different foods, flavors, we test them all. The Neuralink listens, it sees which ones we experience pleasure with. I like that food. It can physiologically measure how we're doing. Then, with all the manufactured food that's coming, whether you agree that's a good idea or are we running a risk of losing our anti-fragility by not having complexity of food, lots of issues going on. But they feed that into the Optimus and it becomes the best chef in the world that knows your literal reaction to different foods and flavors and can be
yeah,
the best.
it's
It's
just
like,
chemistry, isn't it?
and your reaction and role with it, not just the chemistry. It's our role in it. We're almost reducing ourselves back into being part of the world. Perhaps we'll be playthings for the AIs.
Well, they're talking about DNA-based medicine, so why not DNA-based food, DNA-based drink?
The more you explore this, we're going to get into a world that is so incredibly different to what we've got now.
No,
And
yeah,
that's why I think your work is really important to say, like, if we've trained humans, children, to grow up in a world where I want to be a doctor and that's what I'm going to be, and I believe that's the way the world will be, as they say, the best way to make God laugh is to make plans.
well, the thing is, right, when my kids were younger, the one thing I noticed was that the way they interacted with their phones was very different to the way I interacted with my phone, and I've never taught them how to use the phone.
Yes.
So when a 2-year-old now grows up to say, I want to be a doctor, regardless of what that kiddie's parents are saying, that child will grow up knowing that being a doctor means something completely different in 30 years' time than it does today, than it did when we were 2.
I wrote another post a few weeks ago about robot nannies. The humanoid robots
It's a
will
TV
be
show.
connected to the internet and the large language models with some human knowledge available to them.
Yeah.
So our children are going to grow up in an environment where you perhaps remember being young and asking why, and parents saying, we don't know. Well, now they do. They look it up on the internet. Well, the robot nanny will know instantly. It will be able to work with the individual. I mean, there must be so many people in the
Data.
world that had some incredible capacity for playing the piano or whatever else it might have been, playing football, soccer, that never got the chance to do it.
Yep.
But if we've got these AI nannies that can work with us, we might be on the verge of a revolution that every human could reach their capacity.
Well, you say that though, don't you? And then you look at the internet and people believe the earth is flat. So
It's like there's two possible paths forward. Is it?
conspiracy or science, pseudo
Yes.
or real? So how do
And
you differentiate? I mean, what beguiles me as an ardent anti-theist is that we're talking about AI and what it can do for the planet and the Webb telescope and how far into the universe it's looking, and the fact that the universe is 93 billion miles across, right? And people are still arguing about who's got the best invisible friend. And that's one of the issues we have to address.
I find it really fascinating that up on the space station, there's a Russian and an American. But down here, we're at war, not literally between the two, but
Yeah.
practically at war. It's like there's two different worlds.
Well, there's studies on that as well, and one of the famous ones is they take the researchers take 2 groups of boys to an island, and they don't tell the boys that there's another group on the island. And as soon as the 2 groups meet, by the way, this is all orchestrated. And as soon as the 2 groups meet on the beach, they start clashing. right? And they continue to clash every time they meet. The only way they overcome it is what the researchers do is they take one person from this group and bring them over here and swap them over, right? So over a period of weeks, they swap everybody from one group to the other. So everybody gets a chance to be with the other group. Once they've got through all of them, they all realize they're all the same.
Well, I've seen the same thing said about racism, that I presume it's the same in a lot of other places, but they say the most racist bits of the UK are the ones where they're the least mixed. Where you've got London and there are all the different cultures, people are much more accepting of the different races because they're simply just used to it being mixed up.
It's there. Yeah, because they're used to it.
So that.
But that's not to say, I mean, Nigeria last year banned white actors from TV adverts. You know, so that's wholly racist, but no one ever mentions that kind of thing. It's not, it's everybody. And in my lectures, I get people from all over the world. Everybody is racist. But if we go back to what we said earlier, it's not racism per se, it's marginal bigotry and prejudice. Yes, I'll give you that. But it's protectionism, it's
In
tribalism.
groups and out groups again.
In groups and out groups. It's perfectly understandable.
And in fact, one of the core things that they're talking about with spiral dynamics, Ken Wilber talking about different levels as well, integral theory, is that as we move to more and more levels of complexity, more complexity as we go up through the groups, is what we're actually doing is we're building and identifying with bigger groups of people. And initially, physical survival is me. Tribalism is immediate family or tribe. Then it's the town. Then it's the national. Then it's the world. And then it's, well,
yeah, and that's why I say, yeah, that's why I say it's going to take aliens coming down to be that biggest picture. You know, I mean, obviously they're already here, depending on which conspiracy you believe.
Well, Elon Musk is an alien, if people have said so.
Yeah, so is Mark Zuckerberg, so on and so forth. They're all
yeah, but different kind of alien, obviously. Yeah.
Oh, okay. I didn't know
Different
that
planet.
bit.
Yeah.
Silly Darren.
So are you hopeful that what you're doing and perhaps other people and potentially what we can do with potentialization, we can make a difference? We've got a better chance of humanity getting to where it needs to be.
I think I've got a thing called Destination 7, where I think everybody is capable of getting to AQ7. The curve, the bell curve, the middle bit is around 5.5, 6, right? But
At the moment.
And that conforms to all the other developmentalists out there. And what I'm thinking is that by raising people's awareness of at least 5 cognitive, just 5, not a lot, 5 cognitive intentions, we can get everybody up a level because they're more aware. They've got more choice. They can choose how they respond. That's it. The most important thing is choice.
Back to spiral dynamics, and well, Maslow just says new levels emerge. Spiral dynamics says we only move to more complex thinking when the current thinking within the current social context and environment we find ourselves in is beginning to struggle. It's not working so well. It might be because another tribe has moved into our area, or it might be because we're polluting the planet.
He didn't invent that. Piaget said that first with disequilibrium. That's all he was talking about.
Yes.
So in my theory, I call it disruption. Piaget called it disequilibrium. Other people have called it identicide. You know, there's lots of names for it, but you're absolutely right. The only way to grow, let me rephrase that, John. We don't grow in the status quo. We only grow through disruption, disequilibrium, whatever.
It's like some stress is good as long as it doesn't take us to a disruptive or destructive level of stress. Yes. But the question is, if you're a tribe, you can burn that bit of the forest and move on to another one. The current state of the world and the current complexity might potentially be disruptive to the planet in lots of ways. Some people say it's not, but some people say we'll get through it. But the question is it a race? Do we need to improve our ways of thinking before it's too late?
No, we do, because for example, for me, it's more of a Star Trek utopia. When are we going to get to the point where you realize on a finite planet, we cannot have infinite growth in an economic sense as well? Why do we always strive for that in the UK? At what point do we say, you know what? House developers, let's limit their capacity to make profit, because They could have 1,000 houses on an estate, and in January they're worth 200 grand each. But for no reason at all, other than market forces, they're worth 250 by December. They've done nothing for that. But each house is worth 50 grand more. Well, who loses out in that scenario? Right? It's the punter, it's the person buying the house. But the house builder has done nothing to warrant, what's that, a 25% increase in the value of the thing that they're building, right? Their wages haven't gone up, their overheads haven't gone up. It's market forces. And the other thing, the flip side to that is, if you've got 1,000 houses coming to a town, why does that supply and demand now, with oversupply, not reduce the cost of every house in the town, as normal economic systems would? Right. So let's, for example, you limit house developers to cost plus 10%. Housing market would sort itself out in about 2 years. You know, that kind of idea.
Some people are absolutely free market, that it will always sort itself out. But there are the dangers that you've got external costs that doesn't take into account. So my politics is not extreme one way, extreme the other. It's like we're living in a really complex world, and a free market is obviously better suited to human nature in many respects,
Except corruption.
But it can't cope with some things which are bigger than the market. So, I mean, as a country, we might need an army to protect ourselves from rogue countries. Individual companies are not going to want to pay for an army. The country's going to have to do it. So there are multiple levels of things to be aware of all at the same time in society.
Of course.
And it's that complexity of thinking that we need to be open to multiple levels without trying to impose one view or the other, and being open to change as the situation changes. Yeah, black and white is dangerous.
Agreed. It's how we think that's key, that's going to get us going forward, not what we think.
Yes. So, are we?
Do you want to wind up there? 1 hour, 12 minutes.
I was going to say, do you want to sum up where you're up to? Do you want to? And what's next?
For me, the Thinking Deliberately is my first book, and it's called Thinking Deliberately because we don't. Okay, and what it's going to do is it's going to expose our thinking patterns and offer a few tweaks throughout the book. And then I'm going to move on to leading deliberately and coaching deliberately, so that we can develop organizations and the coaching environment, because I think coaching is a bit stifled at the moment, and everybody's doing exactly the same things, but no one ever disrupts the industry. And that's what I want to try to do. So that's what I want to do this year. I want to try and get 5 books out, but I'll definitely get 3 out. Okay. I think I want to try to impact academia using constructive development theory. So how we think as students. I've got a question set that does that, so we'll see what happens with that.
A question then. You mentioned various thinkers that have talked state development models in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Why have they not influenced? Why have they not been picked up and said, that explains a lot. We can make society better?
Well, you're absolutely right. And you answered that at the very beginning when you said, well, I talked to some other people and they said, well, I didn't fully get that, but it was interesting. That's the problem. You said earlier that people might not like the idea of developmental levels. The problem is they exist and they work and they explain lots of things, because that's how I fell into this. I suddenly realized that when I read Keegan's and Lasky's descriptions of a level 2 person, I knew who in my mind that related to, and it helped to explain their behavior. Well, what comes before the behavior is the thinking, and it helps to explain that too.
One of the ways I like to think about this is that David Beckham had amazing football skills in a way that most people don't. Most people accept that, but they're less inclined to accept that people have got better thinking. They're okay with specializations. Well, he's better at maths, but we're talking about a general better thinking that can cope with
cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
You know, our capacity to hold two things, opposing ideas, true at the same time without getting cognitive dissonance. If you, the best way to do it is multiple perspectives. So it goes back to what we said about the tribalism and the mapping kids across the different teams. The more perspectives you have on something, the greater your capacity to see the dots that you need to join. Multiple perspectives is key.
And there are some forces in the world that are trying to stop it for particular reasons. If we look at extreme societies that try to stop girls going to school, for example, because it gives them more power. So
it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
Yes, and that's
we know, John, that that's temporary. Every time people have tried to oppress other people, it's always been temporary. Yeah.
And yet there are some aspects where it feels in some places that we're going a bit backwards in terms of fixed ideas. Politics, polarization.
This is it. So there's a great book for anybody watching this. If you want a book, a difficult book, don't get me wrong, it's called The Listening Society. I really can't remember the author because I can't pronounce his name, but it's called The Listening Society.
Hansi something. Hansi.
Yeah.
And it's not actually a person, is it? It's two or three different people have written it, and they've put a name on it.
Yeah, they've just put a name on it, but I couldn't remember that. I couldn't remember that name. And the idea behind that is, and I've created a political party called the Non-Partisan Party, where it just looks at good decisions. Now that goes back to what you said about, can AI make political decisions? Can it make human decisions? You know, so if there's this is the understanding, if there's a policy that impacts 95% of people positively and 5% negatively, is that still a good policy?
Well, I had a little go at politics a few years ago, because I was really interested in society and where is it going, and is politics going to be the answer? But I think a lot of the time politics moves very slowly. In some ways it is led by society, and it's always trying to catch up.
And that's why it's always centrist. Level 3, socialized mind, middle ground, what's best for everyone.
But I remember often hearing people saying politicians don't listen. And that was following the council having done a big exercise to find out what people were interested in and what people wanted to do, and actually making the decision based on what the majority wanted. But of course, the people that didn't get what they want then said they don't listen.
Mm-hmm.
So from what perspective are you looking at things?
Yeah, so from the non-partisan party, it would be what's best for the country, what's best for the people. And if it impacts only a few people negatively, it's still a good policy. But that's a difficult one to get your head around.
There is a method of consensus making, isn't there? I think where you can actually bring people together, and having gone through the exercise of being involved in the decision, even if you didn't necessarily get what you wanted, people can be more supportive if they feel like they're part of the process.
Yeah, democratic socialism, that kind of thing. There's all kinds of different socialisms, and all different kinds of democracies. And if you go to Wikipedia and put it in, you'll find a whole list of them.
But we also know if you take socialism to an extreme, and take out the human motivation of capitalism and entrepreneurship and success and reward, that can be really dangerous as well. So it's a balance between all these different aspects of human nature.
So now you know where constructive development theory comes into it as well, because now what we're looking at is we're striving for balance. If you're polarized in one way, you are limited. If you're polarized in the other way, you're still limited. What we need is the capacity to choose between the two. And that requires balance in your thinking, your capacity to join those dots.
So perhaps that's the place to stop, is that not only individually, but collectively, we need the capacity to choose the best way forward.
Agreed.
Thank you. Really interesting.
And you. Thanks a lot.